Why do they cover this?
Probably just across the sound.
You can hardly hear it.
Maybe they get rid of it, or you snuff tape.
I'm gonna.
One man come in the name of love. One man come and go. One man come here to justify. One man to overthrow. In the name of love. One more in the name of love. In the name of love. One more in the name of love. One man caught on a barbed wire fence. One man hearing his east. One man washed on an empty beach. One man betrayed with a kiss. In the name of love. One more in the name of love. In the name of love. One more in the name of love. Any morning, April 4, short rings out in the Memphis sky. Free your life, they took your life. They could not take your pride. In the name of love. In the name of love. In the name of love. Say we need it. We need it. We need it. Say we need it. What more can we do? What more can we do? In the name of love. Come on, in the name. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. In the name of How sweet the sound that saves a wretch like me. How but now I'm found.
Good morning. It's like we're on the spaceship. Way back. Okay, most recently, I have been co-facilitating the religious education for the adult education program with Susan Caldwell. And we're glad that how's it going? Can you hear me? Louder? Drop it a little. Whatever. That's wonderful, because I'm very nervous, and the fact that everyone's kind of relaxed helps me. So whatever your age, ability, origin, gender, race, identity, orientation, or background, if you want to worship with us, you are welcome. Here we have found that diversity of belief and opinion add depth to the experience of community. In this community, we have found we need not think alike to love alike. We are united, therefore, not by creed, but by covenant, to support each other on our spiritual journey and to work together for a better world. If you're visiting for the first time, we would ask that you fill out a visitor card and little blue cards in the pew in front of you. If you are online, then we ask that you fill out on the comment section of Facebook. Someone has put in a place where you can give information about yourself, a visitor log online. Our minister is the Reverend Barbara Gerald, who is on summer vacation right now, study leave, and will return to the pulpit in August. So now I'd like to invite Sally Wood, our board president, to come forward and share some announcements.
Good morning, one and all. What a beautiful day. Happy Father's Day. Isn't it Father's Day? Next Sunday, we're going to have a potluck brunch right here at the church. Bring a dish to share. It will start at 11 o'clock, and at 11:30, we will jointly watch roughly 150,000 Unitarians together for the GA Sunday morning worship. It will be streaming so we can watch it together and have a good time. If you have any questions, just ask Amanda Lawrence, and she'll be glad to help you and bring what you would like to eat and share with others. The volunteer of the month for June. Okay, who is a building and grounds volunteer, a climber of the light brigade, an overnight campouts organizer, a contributor to the worship service and to adult RE discussions, and a past board member of All Souls? Here she comes to save the day. That means Dawn Subich is our volunteer of the month, and a fabulous, fabulous member she is. There is no adult religious education today, next week, and the 4th of July weekend. We'll see you all on July 10th and bring your ideas of what we should do next. The Zoom lunch continues at 12 o'clock on noon. The giveaway the plate for the non-pledge income for the month of June, which is Pride Month, is the Louisiana Trans Advocates. It's a local Shreveport chapter that meets here at All Souls every first Sunday of the month at about 1:30 if you want to come. LTA is a statewide organization advocating for the rights of trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people in Louisiana. They also provide support for trans people, as well as a resource list for healthcare providers, legal assistance, and a guide to the necessary ID documents for making your name and gender changes. We have been accepted as a sponsor guild. We are now waiting to hear about our assigned family, which will be arriving from either Afghanistan or Ukraine. When they arrive, we will need all of us to help and them feel welcome and supported as they get settled. If you want to be part of the working team on this, ask Bennett Upton or Susan Caldwell, and they'll put you on the list so you can know how you can help. The Highland Blessing Dinner continues from 5 to 6 at the corner of Olive and Highland at the Highland Center. And we continue with our meditations on Saturday mornings with Larry Andrews and our Friday night Salty Chalice. Welcome to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church, and we will continue with the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Even though the majority of our service this morning is going to be focused on Juneteenth, we do acknowledge that today is Father's Day, and we do recognize those fathers who are joining us or men who have served in father-like positions. And we will, at some point later on in this service, have a tribute. So we want to make sure that you don't feel that you've been neglected if you're a father today, right? Two other quick little reminders. We no longer pass the baskets for donations. If you would like to make an offering, the baskets are located in the back of the sanctuary. And last but not least, as we enter the spirit of worship, we ask that you turn off or silence all of your electronic devices and be present here in this moment, in this place. These are the words of Lucille Clifton, a 20th century African-American poet. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on the bridge between starshine and clay, one hand holding tight, my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Juneteenth, short for June the 19th, marks the day when the federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1865 to take control of the state and to ensure that all enslaved people were free. The troops' arrival came a full 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. So Juneteenth honors the end of slavery in the United States and is considered the longest running African-American holiday. Some individual states had made this Juneteenth a state holiday, but it was only made an official federal holiday just last year. June 19th has a very special meaning for a woman by the name of Opal Lee. Opal Lee was born in Marshall, Texas, and moved to Fort Worth. And when she was 12, a mob of white supremacists vandalized and set fire to her family's home. Helpless, she watched her home burn to the ground as police stood by and did nothing to stop the violence. That attack happened in 1939 on June 19th. So for decades, worked tirelessly to get age of 89. She pledged to walk 1,400 miles from her home in Texas to Washington, D.C. When her family and supporters expressed concern, after all, she was 89 years old, she acquiesced, but she did walk over 300 miles, often in symbolic stints of 2.5 miles, to mark the years it took for men, women, and children to be freed in Galveston. She also gathered 1.6 million signatures to a petition and has been nicknamed the grandmother of Juneteenth. In 2021, Ms. Lee stood next to the president when he signed the legislation that made June 19th the national holiday. This is how President Barack Obama describes Juneteenth. Juneteenth has never been a celebration of victory or an acceptance of the way things are. It is a celebration of progress. It's an affirmation that despite the most painful parts of our history, change is possible, and there is still so much work to do. So, what are we doing? And this, for folks who might not be a part of the UU Church, I did want to add that the Unitarian Universalist Church is making an effort to address the racism that we still see in our world today. Paula Cole Jones, who is from the UU Association, after working with congregations on these issues of racism for over 15 years, she realized that a person who believes the 7 principles of the UU Church could do a really good job of obeying those principles and still not be aware of the oppression of many people on the systemic level. She was the one who proposed that we have an 8th principle. For people identified as white, it is too easy to ignore these issues, which is exactly what keeps this racism in our society alive. We need to decenter whiteness and other dominant cultures in the UU Church. The 8th principle came from a feeling that we need to do something to renew our commitment to this work, to hold ourselves accountable and to fulfill the potential of our existing principles. Now, I believe, Brittany, you have, okay. So if you would please look at the screen and join me in reading the 8th principle. Oh, and if you would like to rise in body and spirit, that would be great. Okay. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Thank you. You may be seated. At this time, I would like to ask Pam, Natalie, to come up to lead us in our children's chalice lighting.
Good morning. We light this chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open mind. This is the church of the helping hands. This is the church of the loving heart. Together with mind, hands, and heart, we care for the earth and for each other.
For our second chalice lighting, I would like to use responsive reading. And there are many choices with the responsive reading. It would be on the screen. It also is in your hymnal, the gray hymnal, number 584. And if you have a program from the back, it should also be there. So responsive reading, number 584. And I would like you at this time to rise in body or spirit. The title of this is A Network of Mutuality by the Reverend Martin Luther King. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day, we must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. Thank you. And now please remain standing for our unison affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the sacred. Thus do we covenant with each other. You may be seated. When Susan Caldwell asked me if I would be the worship associate for this service, I knew from the beginning I wanted to include the song Lift Every Voice and Sing. I looked at several renditions of it, and Susan also did. And we agreed that the one that we're going to show you is the one that had the most kind of a history and also energy. Now, it is produced by the NFL. I don't want to give anybody the impression we're all like football-y people here, but after we looked at the different options, it was the one that kind of touched us the most. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask Brittany to play Lift Every Voice.
We're going to have as it's played in the stadium. At the dawn.
Story for All Souls, read by Pamela Carlisle.
All different now. Juneteenth, the first day of freedom. by Angela Johnson. A June morning breeze off the port blew the smell of honeysuckle past the fields, across the yard, and into our room to wake us. And nobody knew as we ate a little, talked a little, and headed to the fields as the sun was rising, that soon it would all be different. Then we worked and we worked and we worked some more under the hot Texas sun, until word spread from the port to town, through the countryside and into the fields, that a Union general had read from a balcony that we were all and now and forever free, and things would be all different now. I watched as my Aunt Laura sang as she held her baby. Mr. Jake, who some say was 100, cried quietly, and a group of grown people bowed their heads and whispered things to each other I could not hear. My mama held my hand softly and looked beyond as another breeze blew over and everything fell to a hush. But later, Papa, Mama, the aunts and uncles, and all of my cousins had an afternoon picnic by the water. My baby brother crawled around our blanket as we listened to the sound of the waves. And as more people joined us, we ate as a free people, laughed as free people, and told stories as free people on into the night. What was before would be no more. As we walked back home, the cool of the night soothed our tired feet that padded quietly past the shadowy fields of cotton. And in the morning, the smell of honeysuckle will wake me again beside my sisters and brothers to a time that will be for all of us, all different now.
Thank you, Pam. And I should have asked you to stay up here to start the, sing the children out, okay? So I'll step away from the mic just a bit. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit. Cute. So even though our primary theme today is Juneteenth, we did not want to neglect all of you out there who are fathers or father-like figures. And we've asked, and I'm grateful that Eric first has agreed to share a little about his experiences as a father.
Don't roam around the mall. Don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't walk around in a hoodie with the hood up. Don't touch anything you're not buying. Always have a receipt and bag when you leave the store, even if it's just for a pack of gum. Never leave the house without your ID. Never drive around wearing a tank top. Don't drive around with the music too loud. Don't stop in rural areas for gas or a bathroom break. If you get stopped, don't run. Put your hands up. Don't make a lot of moves. If you ever get pulled over, put your hands on the dashboard and ask if you can get out your license and registration. These are things I didn't have to even think about teaching my son, because I have this pasty white skin, or more importantly, my son has this pasty white skin. I also didn't have to choose between putting food on the table or gas in the car, paying the rent or taking my son to the doctor, paying the electric bill or paying for a speeding ticket, because I'm fortunate enough that I have a job that pays a living wage. I also don't have to worry about the state passing a law that will tell my son that he can't play a sport that he wants to play. We call these white privilege or straight privilege, or the privilege of having a good job. But I mean, it's 2022. I mean, isn't it about time that my privileges became everybody's normal? So for me, being a father can be divided into two stages: before the divorce and after the divorce. So Sam was an amazing baby, but the one thing he hated to do was he hated to go to sleep in his crib. And so we started this practice of lying down with him and cuddling with him until he went to sleep. And that was really one of my favorite things, is to lie down with him and talk to him and watch him fall asleep, because that's one of the few times during the day when I really, because I was working, it was one of the times I really had a chance to be alone with them and to bond with them. When he was about 3.5, we went to San Diego for Christmas, and I wanted to take him to SeaWorld. Nobody else wanted to come, so it was just me and Sam. And so we went to SeaWorld. I'm getting him out of his car, and he had this toy train. It was called Douglas. It's one of the Thomas the Tank Engine trains. It's a wooden train. And he went everywhere with Douglas. He loved Douglas. And so I'm taking him out of the car, and I said, Sam, don't you want to leave Douglas in the car? And he said, no, I want to bring him with him. I said, okay. And so I put him on my shoulders, and Sam and Douglas and I went off to see SeaWorld. We had a great time, and about an hour before SeaWorld was closing, he fell asleep on my shoulders, and I looked at his hand and I realized Douglas wasn't there. And so we walked all over SeaWorld, retracing our steps. We checked the Lawson Pond. We checked all the bushes by where the parking lot. No Douglas. And SeaWorld closed. We had to leave. And I kept telling him, I kept saying, Sam, I shouldn't have let you take. I should have made you leave it in the car. It's my fault. And then we're driving home, and Sam said, he's in the back seat, and he says, Daddy, it's okay. It's not your fault. Don't be sad. And then a little while later, he said, Daddy, do you feel like crying? I said, kind of, do you? And he said, yeah. And he said, let's cry. So we cried for Douglas. The hardest part of the divorce was knowing that I would never get to see Sam every day again. That was extremely hard for me. The irony is, I think that getting divorced actually made me a better father. So I have had these rules. The first thing isn't really a rule. I just made sure to tell Sam I loved him and make sure he knew I loved him. So I don't really think of that as a rule because it's fairly obvious. So my first rule really was to provide stability, because I figured I'd screwed up his life enough, and I wanted to make sure that he knew that when he came to my house, he was safe, and he knew that everything would be okay there. One of the things that we did shortly after the divorce was we joined All Souls. And I remember the first day, I remember sitting up in the pews, and I'm looking out behind at these windows, and I see this troop of kids go parading by the windows. And I thought, well, that's a little different for a church. And at the end of the service, and it turns out they were having a scavenger hunt. At the end of the service, I walk out, and Sam comes running up to me, and he says, Daddy, you have to come see this nature trail. So that was my introduction to the nature trail. What I didn't realize is that I thought I was coming here for Sam, and what I didn't realize was that the church would also help me heal. And Sam still goes to the UU church. He's now every week he drives 45 minutes into Boise. He's stationed up in Idaho. He drives 45 minutes up into Boise and goes to UU church there, and he runs their sound system now. Rule number 2 was don't say anything bad about my ex-wife, Georgia, to anyone, because I didn't want it to get back to Sam. I didn't think that was fair to him. Rule number 3 was always be there for him. And I really learned this from my father. And so one day we were at Outback. I think it was just Nadia and Anna and I think it was Nadia's birthday we were celebrating. And Nadia and I have sort of had this joke about Outback that whenever we go to Outback, something bad's going to happen. So they made us wait 30 minutes one time because they forgot that we had asked for a table. They spilled my iced tea all over the table. They brought the food cold. It just something always happens. And so we went there for a birthday and thought, okay, today nothing's going to happen. And just as we sat down to order, I get a phone call, and it's from Sam, and Sam said, Dad, you have to come because Mom's in a lot of pain and she's on the bathroom floor and you really need to come. And I looked at Nadia, I said, I have to come. And she said, go. And I went and we ended up taking George to the emergency room. Everything turned out okay. But that really showed me that Sam really knew that I'd always be there for him no matter what. And he could always call me no matter what. I wasn't perfect. There was a time when I looked up the clock. I was working, I looked at the clock and I realized I was an hour late for picking him up from Caddo Magnet and it was raining. I still feel guilty about that, but I tried. The one thing I did have learned about being a parent is that you always worry about your kids. And even after they've grown to be adults, even after they've joined the Air Force, even if they moved 2,000 miles away, you still worry about them. So happy Father's Day, and happy Juneteenth.
Thank you. So we have reached the time in our service, our worship service, to take a few minutes to meditate in silence. So we ask that you take this silence and either reflect on what has been shared thus far, or a concern that you might have, or gratitude you might have. And then following this time of silence, we encourage those who want to come forward to light one of our candles, to honor someone, to express a concern, or as a way to communicate thanksgiving. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and in miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. I needed to just check, make sure that Frank is here. So Frank Severek is currently a graduate research assistant at Northwest Louisiana Archives at LSU Shreveport. Holds both an associate and bachelor's degrees in criminal justice. He's currently enrolled in the Master of Liberal Arts program at LSU Shreveport, where his thesis research focuses on the social dynamics of the rise of racial supremacy and political violence in Northwest Louisiana during the era of Reconstruction following the American Civil War. Will you please help me in welcoming Mr. Severek?
Hello, good morning. Thank you for having me in your house of worship. I haven't been in a church probably since I was about 14, but I understand this isn't your typical church, so thank you for having me. But enough about me. So I focus my research on Reconstruction in Northwest Louisiana, specifically looking into the violence that occurred in the year of 1868 that coincided with the presidential election. Specifically looking at the Red River region, Caddo, and focusing on Bossier. A lot has been written about Bloody Caddo. Some of you might be familiar with that terminology. There was a similar story occurring in Bossier Parish at the same time. So without any delay, I'm going to take about 10 minutes and share a bit of my thoughts and research. So today we're celebrating Juneteenth, established in due to the General Order number 3 in June 19th of 1865. This celebration began in Texas, swept through the American South. The first civil rights bill in American history would come shortly after, in 1866, and Black suffrage and the right of freedmen to vote under the 14th and 15th Amendment would follow shortly thereafter. But things were not an immediate change following the end of the Civil War, especially for this area. What would come next might be considered an even darker chapter in the lives of freed people in the American South. To summarize the reasoning for this, as one Southern planner put it, prior to the end of the war, you were worth something monetarily. Now you're worth nothing. So working conditions got much more dangerous, and racial violence actually increased following the end of the war. It's due to a myriad of reasons: racism, politics. There seems to be an interwoven relationship here. So what happened in Northwest Louisiana following the end of the Civil War? When the surrender documents were signed in April of 1865 at Appomattox, Shreveport remained the capital, a capital city of the Confederacy, and the last capital city of the Confederacy until nearly a month later, when the flag was finally lowered in May of 1865, as Kirby Smith and the Confederates finally left Shreveport. What followed thereafter was a period of, to simply put it, lawlessness. The only legal authority in the area at the time would have been federal troops that would have came in at a delay after the surrender of the city. The Union's first priority of order when entering the city was not to establish a safe zone for all of its residents and all of the recently emancipated in a very chaotic situation, economically and socially. They were to preserve order and to establish a Union foothold in Shreveport. To put into context the lawless scenario of an already lawless region, I think it needs to be understood that even prior to the Civil War, much of the American South and much of the American identity had been associated with mob violence. This has to do with a lot of differing factors, good old-fashioned xenophobia, prejudice, general lawlessness. In the city of Shreveport, 1865 up until the early 1870s, there was no police station. The official police station began, I believe, in 1873. Prior to that, law enforcement in this area consisted of a single constable for the city of Shreveport, and 2 deputies. And this was per ward. So the entirety of the downtown Shreveport Business District would have consisted of about 3 law enforcement officials. The neighborhood of Allendale, which would have existed at the time, is Shreveport's first residential expansion. It would have had 3 individuals officially. Another curious point of fact about this was that per the city ordinances that established this law enforcement presence, it also established a shroud of secrecy where they reported directly to city leadership and not to the public. So let's go back to the end of the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation is finally realized. The hostilities are over. So what's happening now? As Frances Ellen Watkins, first published African-American female author, would call it in her publication, Liberty for Slaves in 1857. What would happen when, as she puts it, that fearful alchemy by which blood can be transformed into gold was now over? Well, the entirety of the Southern economy was established on a extractionary hierarchy that relied on slave labor. It had not industrialized like its northern counterparts in the 1850s, was significantly farther behind. And so immediately following the lowering of the Confederate flag in Shreveport on, I believe it's May the 25th or the 26th of 1865, the Southwestern newspaper here in town would publish a report recounting the events of the lowering of the flag and the leaving of Kirby Smith and Confederate leadership. And immediately following that report on the front page of the Southwestern that day would be an appeal to the recently emancipated freedmen to return to their jobs, to go back to their plantations, go back to their masters, return to work, and an appeal to not get too political in what the conservative papers of the time would describe as radical Republican tyranny, or to put it more bluntly, at their time, their words, Negro tyranny through radical Republicanism. Important to understand for those who don't know, radical Republicanism was not a slur against pro-abolitionist Republican factions. During the late 1850s, going through the Civil War, it was actually like a self-adopted moniker. So that's what they called themselves. And the radical Republicans would see their day following the assassination of Lincoln. Andrew Johnson would come into office. Andrew Johnson did not have a priority in following the war. Andrew Johnson did not have a priority for raising the status of freedmen to an equitable level in society. I think it's my opinion, I think a lot of historians' opinion, that Andrew Johnson's primary concern following the war was the punishment of the Southern planter class. I don't think there's any strong evidence to consider that he put very much thought at all into the well-being of freed people. And this is probably one of the reasons why presidential reconstruction is considered a failure. And the radical Republicans would then have their day. So Caddo Parish, what was happening? Well, like I said before, following the end of the war, this area and many others like it in Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Southern Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, would fall into a dark period of the rise of racial supremacy, racial massacres, and political violence that undoubtedly had a stark racial component. To describe what was going down in 1868 in Caddo Parish, from a testimony to the US Congress during their investigations in the 1870s, I believe this came from 1877. That October in Caddo Parish, it was described that Republicans, whether they be white or colored, cannot live in Caddo Parish without risk of being killed anytime, day or night. And this is not an exaggeration. During that 1 month of October, surrounding the presidential election in which Ulysses S. Grant ended up winning, during the period of congressional reconstruction, during that 1 month between Caddo and Bossier Parish, there's an estimated over 300 murders of Black individuals. And they were undoubtedly all done for the most part, by white perpetrators. Now, at the time, a narrative that is contemporarily familiar to us is, well, and this ran through all of the conservative papers at the time locally as well. It's the black population killing the black population. It's something we hear today. And you'll realize a lot of these narratives that were present during Reconstruction, during that violence, during the Civil War, we're hearing the same things today in the rhetoric. And I think that should put off some alarm bells, and we'll wrap up to that. I think I've got just a couple minutes left. So to point out the starkness of it, during the period of Reconstruction as a whole, Caddo Parish would represent 566 homicides total. To put that into perspective, the population of the city of Shreveport in 1873, at the beginning of the yellow fever epidemic, was 15,000 people. During this period, the decade 1865 to around 1876, before we look at 1876 as the beginning of a large population migration of African Americans from this region to the Midwest. I know the Great Migration will come later and cause several decades, but there was a significant migration from this region during the late 1870s. Caddo Parish represented 16% of all homicides in the state of Louisiana during Reconstruction, while representing only 3% of that population. So that's a fairly stark figure for a place that was fairly remote. There was not a lot of heavy industry here. It would have been cotton trade, timber trade, steamboat trade to the Red River. And to smash apart that narrative of, well, it's the black population on black population violence at the time, statistics generated in the late 1980s by a researcher from Quebec, and the statistics most Reconstruction researchers use today. Violence against blacks by whites during that decade was 52% of all homicides against freed people were committed by whites. The reverse yielded only a 2.1% of homicides on record. The statistical difference of homicides on records of black on black homicide, 9.7%, white on white, 7.2%. This is not a dramatic statistical separation there. Like, if anything, black versus black, white versus black crime was statistically comparable. The other interesting statistic coming out of there is that 70% of all of these homicides against black individuals during that time were committed by groups, multiple perpetrators. This keys in on that mob violence, this American phenomenon that was noticed by Alexis de Tocqueville from visiting historians throughout the frontier era and into the Civil War. The riots that emerged during the 1850s, Bleeding Kansas, collective individual violence. It's something to really meditate on. I seem to be running out of time. I would love to talk more about this. However, I had one quote that I wanted to read in all of its entirety because I found it rather profound. This is a quote from the book Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois, written in 1935. And without further ado, the method of force which hides itself in secrecy is a method as old as humanity. The kind of thing that men are afraid or ashamed to do openly, and by day they accomplish secretly, revealed and at night. The method has certain advantages. It uses fear to cast out fear. It does things at which open method hesitates. It may with a certain impunity attack the high and the low. It need not hesitate at no outrage of maiming or murder. It shields itself in the mob mind and then throws over all a veil of darkness which becomes glamour. It attracts people who otherwise could not be reached. It harnesses the mob. How is it that men who want certain things done by brute force can so often depend on the mob? Total depravity, human hate, and schadenfreude do not fully explain the mob spirit in America. Before the wide eyes of the mob is the shape of fear. Back of the writhing, yelling, cruel-eyed demons under who break, destroy, maim, and lynch and burn at the stake is a knot, large or small, of normal human beings. And these human beings at heart are desperately afraid of something. Of what? Of many things, but usually of losing their jobs, of being declassed, of being degraded or actually disgraced, of losing their hopes, their savings, their plans for their children, of their actual pangs of hunger, of dirt, of crime, and of all of this, most ubiquitous in modern industrial society is that fear of unemployment. It is in its nucleus of ordinary men that continually gives the mob its initial and awful impetus. Around this nucleus, to be sure, gather snowball-wise all manner of flotsam, filth, and human garbage, and every lewdness of alcohol in current fashion. But of all this is the horrible covering of this inner nucleus of fear. And those are the words of W.B. Du Bois discussing mob violence during Reconstruction and following thereafter, because it didn't stop. The reason the violence ended in this region around 1876, the last spike happening again coinciding with the presidential election and political cycle of 1874, is to simply put, the conservatives won. The white supremacists won. That's why the migration happened in the 1870s. It was no longer necessary to use violence and mob violence as a tool to achieve political goals because the political goals had been achieved. This would bring in a new order that would yield into an era of strict black codes, of Jim Crow. Eventually, we would get to Plessy versus Ferguson, go into separate but equal. And then it would take 50 some odd years later before a second civil rights revolution happens. We get Brown versus Board of Education, 1955. You know, around the same time, a revivalism of the culture of the white leagues, of the Knights of the White Camellia, of the KKK in this region, as the white resistance movement in the US South was heavily influenced by thinkers and propagandists from right here in town that spread their message all across America through the White Citizens Council movement as a white resistance movement to integration. So, you know, I suppose there's a lot to really meditate over here and to really think about. I think there's a lot of hope. I think there was a lot of good things that happened. And as a final note, I'd like to remind us to kind of look to that side of how good things did happen through here. During Reconstruction, Louisiana had the first Black governor in the United States, PBS Pinchback. Our own C.C. Antoine that lived in town, whose home burned down recently, state senator from Caddo Parish. Had he have survived the yellow fever epidemic in 1873, Samuel Peters would have been America's first Black congressman. So, you know, let us not lose some of the lessons through all of the morbidity. And thank you for letting me speak today.
Thank you. Thank you again. And now, as we're closing our service, I'm asking Bob Jordan, one of our own, to come and lead us in We Shall Overcome. The words should be on the screen or on your program, or yes, one or the other. in this never-ending shade. The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We brave the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet, the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we will do it. Somehow we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. Thank you again. Go in peace.